Welcome to my channel. I'm Elizabeth Liz Muschett, and we're talking about Neptune to Aries with a new vision. And my astrology colleagues and friends that are joining me today are Madam Simon and Justin Crockett Elzie. Welcome. How are you guys doing today?
Good.
Pretty good.
Good.
It's
Good.
good to have you back on.
What's that?
It's good to have you both back on. I look forward to us talking about Neptune into Aries.
I was thinking, since this is a 14-year transit, I don't think we'll be talking about Neptune too much, maybe it's somewhere down the road, but this will be the beginning of a long story, right?
Yes. Okay, so I pushed the wrong button. So to get a hold of Simon, her website is iconalchemy.com. My website is alightpath.com. And Justin's website is justincrocketelzie.com. And we always look forward to hearing from you. So Justin, I'll let you talk about this slide for us, please.
Yeah, so I was doing a little just backward, research. It was really quite interesting about the discovery of Neptune. I thought I'd bring this story in here since we are talking about Neptune, and a lot of people don't know the backstory. But so Neptune is unique as a planet because it wasn't discovered based on somebody observing it or just noticing it in the sky, because of course it has to have a telescope. But it was actually it's actually the first planet discovered attributed to celestial mechanics, because astronomers hypothesized that it was there based on the perturbations of Uranus's orbit. They knew that there was some fixed body out there, some planetary body that was affecting Uranus's orbit, and because it does. And so there all the way back to Galileo. Galileo actually did observe Neptune briefly, but he thought it was a fixed star. And this was like around the early 1600s. And then fast forward to the after Uranus was discovered, then there's these astronomers, especially there was a couple of British astronomers that were looking for this hypothesized planetoid, and the Brits didn't really get it, but the Frenchmen did. And of course, the French astronomer Urbain le Verrier, I think that's how you say his name, actually did the calculations based on the British guy's work and everything, and then he sent a letter to the German astronomer in Berlin and says, check these through your big telescope. So that's actually where it was actually discovered, through the Berlin Observatory, through that telescope. And so the day that the Berlin astronomer got the letter, which was on September 23rd, 1846, that evening, with his assistant, looked up in the sky, and they actually found Neptune. Now, it's interesting that when Neptune was actually observed at that point, because it had been observed a couple of times before, but they thought it was a fixed star, and so it was kind of a hit and miss thing. But this particular event, Neptune was conjuncting Saturn at the same time. So it was a Neptune-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius when it was discovered. It was almost was named Oceanus, but it got named Neptune, of course, after the Roman god of the sea. And of course, that's Poseidon in Greek, and the modern ruler of Pisces. And so it's associated with the collective. And its orbital period is 164.8 to 165 years around the sun. So I thought that was kind of an interesting backstory. It was based on celestial mechanics. They hypothesized it was there before and so they went looking for it. So just sort of an interesting story.
Thanks for adding that, Justin. And I'll let you continue here.
Yeah, so I went back and because between 1000 AD, the Neptune's been in Aries only 6 times. And interestingly, in these dates, when we go back, we start to see some particular themes. Usually, Neptune in Aries represents a lot of change in power structures. And also, there's a lot of wars during those times too. I'm not saying we're going to have wars now, but some interesting things happened also in Christendom because of the association with Neptune and Pisces with Christianity. So in 1042 to 1057, during the time of Edward the Confessor in England, who was there during that whole time, there was an official split with the Christian church between Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy. It was kind of huge. It was also the end of the Viking Age and many changes within the Byzantine Empire in Europe. The second time, 1206 to 1220, was the time of the Crusades, emergence of the Mongol Empire, and revolution in the Byzantine Empire. And 1370, 1384 was the 100-Year War between England and France. And of course, the Ming Dynasty started implementing some things. Of course, this is something else we see as some inventions. It's a time of inventions, and usually with and a lot of times there's a sort of a colonialism or imperialism, and also the Crusades are a part of that. That usually happens with Neptune and Aries. It usually is war, especially, but really there's these bigger movements with colonialism and empire. And then in 1533 to 1548, of course, that was when the Church of England was established by King Henry VIII, and was the French exploration of North America, and the Spanish were already making their way through Central and South America at that time. So a lot of colonialism. And then in 1697 to 1712, this was the War of the European powers against the Turks and the War of Spanish Succession. And then, of course, in 1861 to 1875, it was the U.S. Civil War. Canada was founded. British and French imperialism were making their way around the world. Germany was unified, and it turned into the German Empire. And that was the time of the Second Mexican Empire. So there's bigger themes are that there's usually changes in power structures and leaders, and nations tend to be a little bit more imperialistic during the times of Neptune and Aries. But that's just sort of a quick drive-by. I'm not sure if either of you two have any comments about that.
Well, I want to thank you, Simon. Do you want to add anything?
Well, since Neptune can relate to our ideals and our vision in a sign ruled by Mars, then we can expect to see perhaps a more aggressive vision. And, a vision that is more achievement oriented. Neptune in Pisces, I wouldn't say it's been achievement oriented. Neptune in Pisces has had, more of a perhaps a cinematic vision or a dreamy vision or a confused vision at times. I do feel like the movement from Pisces to Aries can perhaps feel a little less morose at times, because Neptune in Pisces does seem to have been a little depressive for some. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see which way it goes, and hopefully not too warlike.
Exactly.
Well, I definitely think there'll be some how you want to say some hint of our current century's imperialism, because of we can see what's happening in the United States here with Greenland. That's a great example of that imperialistic fervor with Neptune moving into Aries. And I'm sure it's not going to be the last thing we see during this 14-year period. But it definitely is also a time when alliances change, and we're already seeing that as well, around the world.
Thank you. And then Justin has a quote for us.
Oh, yeah. So I went back and looked at Poseidon from the Odyssey, and there was a line in there. It was actually quite dark, actually. A lot of people don't realize how dark Poseidon and Neptune actually were as gods. But the line, he says, the line between being naive, and hopefulness is almost invisible. And I thought that was something sort of as a period on the Neptune time that we've spent with Pisces, Neptune and Pisces.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're going to talk about Aries. Simon, do you want to talk about Aries? And you can just summarize it.
Right. So Aries is a cardinal sign. It's creative, takes initiative, leadership. It can be a visionary sign. It begins the cycle. It's the beginning of the zodiac. And for those of us in the Northern Hemisphere, it marks the vernal equinox. So it's the beginning of spring. Its ruling planet is Mars. Its element is fire. Its mantra is I am. So it's very assertive. Its keywords are trailblazer. It's active, adventurous, determined, related to new beginnings. It's pioneering, enterprising. But the caution is that it can be aggressive, antagonistic, argumentative, chaotic, and can be very impulsive. It tends to leap before looking, which is great if you need somebody to push somebody out of the way of a moving train, but may be problematic if more caution is warranted.
Would you like to add anything, Justin?
No, I think she got it covered. I like that.
And Neptune, I'll talk about Neptune. Neptune takes about 165 years to orbit the sun, which Justin mentioned earlier. Spends about 14 years in each astrological sign. And some keywords are inspiration, mysticism, imagination, merging, dreamy, spiritual, instincts. And some cautions can be delusional, evasive, lacking boundaries, and gullible. Simon, do you want to add anything?
So one of the things that is interesting with regard to Neptune is that as a modern planet, a transcendental planet, a generational planet, there's these traits that we associate with Neptune, kind of the dreaminess, but also perhaps there can be kind of romantic tendencies that can also go into maybe a little moroseness at times, as there's some self-pitying qualities that we can see. Those qualities actually were originally ascribed to Saturn. And so I find it very interesting, Neptune and Saturn have been hanging out in Pisces, and Neptune's moving into Aries now, but then we're going to have Saturn will join Neptune in Aries. And as Justin pointed out, Neptune was discovered while conjoining Saturn. So I find it very interesting because in modern terms, we can certainly look at them and say, oh, Neptune dissolves boundaries, whereas Saturn likes boundaries. And, Neptune is imaginative rather than realistic, where Saturn is realistic. But to the ancients, they had a lot more in common. So I find it really interesting that we're having this rather momentous ingress with Neptune beginning the cycle through the zodiac again. And Neptune and Saturn will be conjoining in Aries. Over this summer, they're going to be hanging out with each other a bit, and then that's the lead up to their conjunction at 0 degrees of Aries on February 20th, 2026. And so there's this interesting back and forth going on between them over the course of this year, and has been during this last phase in Pisces that they've been going through together.
Justin, would you like to add anything about Neptune?
No, I agree with her. I agree with everything she said, and I think you're right to point out the importance of Saturn, um, and the relationship between these two planets, and of course Uranus as well. Because as I was looking at how they affect each other's, and we know Uranus is that planet of change. So that those three planets together, we always are ones you got to watch, and especially their aspects of what they're doing. Um, but it's interesting to me also that it just feels like as Neptune's moving into, it's the planet that represents the collective consciousness, right? The way kind of the collective's thinking. It's interesting to me. I like what you said. Simon, that where it's actually starting new all the way through the zodiac, because it's like we've completed a cycle in the collective. And now it's like we're starting over like young children again in Aries, the whole collective is. So,
I like that you mentioned young children because, Aries being ruled by Mars, a lot of times we think of, Aries as the warrior, but Aries is also the young child. Aries is also, the kid who dreams of being a great hero, who wants to set off on the grand adventure, who has a sense of wonder about the world. And so, yes, it's Mars ruled sign, but Mars is also about our action and how do we get what we want. And we don't always have to get what we want in excessively aggressive ways. Sometimes there can just be this enthusiasm, this excitement, this zest for life with Aries. And so that is what I would like us to kind of hold in our hearts and our minds for this Neptune ingress into Aries, because what our intentions are as we move forward with this are going to shape our reactions to the things that are going on during this transit,
right.
and help direct them, hopefully, in a way that doesn't involve major conflict.
Exactly. Okay, so we have Neptune um, ingressing into Aries, and this chart, it's on March 30th, and this chart is for Greenwich. So it's 11:58 a.m. Universal Time, and Neptune is circled in the purple at the top of the chart there. And then we have a fixed sign ascendant of Leo, and that's circled in orange on the left. Simon, do you want to talk about this chart at all? Because we're going to show the East Coast chart for the United States and Washington, D.C., and then we'll also show the West Coast of the U.S. with the Seattle chart. But then we're just going to briefly touch on these ones, and then we'll go into the aspects.
So I do find it interesting that for this chart, we have Neptune is trying the ascendant, and it's this fixed ascendant in Leo, which is ruled by the sun in Aries, which is conjoining the midheaven. So that feels to me like a very in your face kind of ingress, very bold, not shy. And making itself heard and known, like coming in with a roar.
And this could also be referred to as the world chart, but the European chart for sure. Justin, what do you want to add anything?
Yeah, if we look at it as like this is the beginning of Neptune and Aries, this is what the world's going to look, this is where the world starts at and what is apt to maybe happen in the world because it's a world chart. I find it interesting that all the planets, the major planets are congregated or these stelliums up in that 9th and 10th house there. And so, to the point of religion, I do think this is interesting to watch because there's this, again, as I say, there's a key note that religion also changes with the changes of Neptune. And, like I said, the Crusades, establishment of the Church of England, and you go back, it's interesting. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in religion in the world, especially with those nodes in the 3rd to 9th house. But I find what's also interesting is in the 10th house, which is the leaders there, is look what we have there. We've got the sun in the house of leaders. We got Chiron, we got the moon, and we got Hygeia. And this tells me that through this 14-year period, we're going to definitely see some pass away. And I think that's going to be a major focus through this 14 years is power and leaders. And I think so. Kind of put that in context of what Hygeia and Chiron are there, the wound of leaders and what leaders may come out. And it's interesting. Also, I love that the moon is there, so it tells me there'll be some women leaders here in the coming 14-year period. But that's where a little bit of the focus is. And I do love that Neptune's on the midheaven. And I definitely think publishing and religion is definitely something to pay attention to. And I think a lot of relationships are going to change with Pluto there in the 7th house. But that's what I would say about the chart.
There's 2 other things that leapt out at me as you were speaking about that. One is that with Neptune at the midheaven, that suggests perhaps a major role to be played by celebrities, because Neptune can very much relate to the glamour of celebrities, movie stars. Neptune, also, we can see with Neptune, when Neptune changes signs, it often has an impact on music and what types of music become popular. And we can see kind of shifts in the arts. And I do find it very interesting that we've got Neptune is hanging out up there with Mercury and Venus up there. You mentioned publishing. So I think we may see some big changes in the arts and in publishing. Certainly we know that, with the advent of AI, it is shaking up those industries quite a bit. So yes, those things I find very interesting. I also find it interesting that that moon conjunct Chiron in the 10th house does suggest, yes, we may see some women leaders. Yes, we may see, the will of the people in public spaces. But with Chiron there, it may well be in response to the incapacitation of some of our prior leaders or power structures. We are already seeing some kinds of shifts with regard to how people are viewing certain leaders, certain political parties, wanting to change things and make entirely new political organizations. So I suspect that is tied to that Moon Chiron conjunction. We also see with Chiron, Chiron is in Aries and has been showing us quite a bit about toxic masculinity, wounded masculinity, as well as ways in which people feel like they don't have the same capabilities to get things done that they have been used to being able to get things done. As our systems are shifting and kind of pulling the rug out from under people. So I find that very interesting that there is that combination there. Chiron, certainly gets endlessly pegged as the wounded healer, but is also very much about teaching us through our wounds and teaching us through the ways in which we, maybe feel like we're not up to a task ahead of us.
Very.
We have to kind of sit with chironic difficulties in order to learn from them. We don't just snap our fingers or take a pill and be able to solve them.
Yeah, I agree. And I want to point out something for the audience that's watching, that something you point out is really important. I like how you pointed out Neptune on the midheaven. I have noticed in my own work that Neptune on the midheaven is an indicator of artists. And it really is. People should pay attention to that, because when Neptune's on the midheaven, I've seen it many times in artist charts. So I agree. I think there's going to be this role to play for, if we think about the hero archetype within the collective. So, since this is an Aries, we could see this sort of, as leaders fail us there with Chiron in the 10th house, that maybe there may be a focus more on hero figures, athletes, artists, that step up in the collective. But I do like that you're spot on with that. I totally agree with you with that.
And I want to mention that the ascendant's in a fire sign Leo, and that midheaven's in Aries, which is a fire sign. So it feels like there's more drive and more passion and more energy for everybody involved. Any other comments, or we'll go to the Washington, D.C. chart.
One more thing just occurred to me. Neptune also can relate to oil. And I do think that this, the shifting of how we are getting our energy needs met and who is exporting what, I think is going to be a big factor on the world stage.
Yeah. And there's something I wanted to see what you two thought of this, because we haven't pointed it out, but I can't forget Mars there in the 12th house. To me, that speaks to a lot of cloak and dagger, there, that secret enemies, but also we're having to work with Mars and tribalism there, with Mars and Aries. I mean, in Cancer, I think we're gonna have to work with tribalism. What is your all's thought on Mars in that 12th house in Cancer?
Well, I want to say that it rules, that Aries. And so, we have Neptune, the sun, and Chiron and the moon there that we've already been talking about. So it's in Cancer. So it's not in its favorite sign. So it's working on what's going to be nurturing to everybody. Simon?
Well, I think, Mars in Cancer can be very protective of what it considers to be its own, especially its people. So yes, that tribal tendency. There is, Mars in Cancer is acting in a way that is fueled by emotion and acting through emotion. It's why its shadow is considered to be passive aggressiveness, for example. But at the same time, it's incredibly protective of home and hearth and family. And at the same time, one of the tasks that I very much like to emphasize Cancer being concerned with is what constitutes safe space. What is a safe emotional space in particular? Is it okay for me to do or say this thing in this space? Am I going to be heard and accepted when I'm trying to express these concerns or do these things? And so when Mars in Cancer is at his best, then he's actually learning how to create safe space rather than divisive space. Mars in Cancer at its worst is being divisive by being so concerned with what is mine that they don't see the harm to what is somebody else's. or they
Right.
don't see the connection between the two. And so figuring out the balance there, how are we taking care of what matters to us without ignoring the concerns of others, without ignoring harm being done to others. I do feel like we've already seen some of this with some of the stuff that's been going on in the United States, that there are people who are very concerned about protecting their own, and so are in this space of, I'm going to hunker down, I'm going to take care of my own thing, and I'm going to shut out this other stuff that's going on, not being willing to recognize that that too is connected. I do think that Mars being in this trine with, Saturn and Mercury and Venus retrograde and the North Node does help us to at least start to get out of just the I'm only going to protect my own, and recognize, oh, if these bad things are happening to these other people over here, it does affect me. It does affect my people.
Right.
So
yeah, I agree.
Okay, we're going to look at the Washington, D.C. chart for the Eastern United States and Canada. So we have a Taurus ascendant, which is Earth, and it's a fixed sign also. And Neptune in this chart is in the 12th house. And then the midheaven is Capricorn. Who wants to start?
Well, if I may just, carry on just for a second here, what you said, that Mars is on the IC. That Mars is on the IC. That's all about, I'm just going to take care of my tribe. I'm going to only take care and worry about my tribe. That's isolationism right there with Mars and Cancer on the IC. But I am, this is amazing, all those planets in the 12th house. Wow.
Yeah.
Want to hide in your cave. That's what it reminds me of. It's like, let's just go. I mean, that just emphasizes the Mars.
Well,
it's like, let's hide.
Yeah. Well, if we could, I'll let you all jump in on that grouping, but I just also want to point out Pluto in the 10th house. I mean, this just tells me that, the United States is going through a whole change of reputation in the world. It's the United States' reputation, because Pluto's in the 10th house. This country's reputation is going to be changed dynamically with Pluto in the 10th house. And I think I think we got a lot of internal issues to deal with.
Yeah. Internal issues to deal with, and the unfortunate potential to shoot ourselves in the foot. Quite literally, since Pisces rules the foot. that Mars trying all that stuff in Pisces is visually is quite literally shooting us ourselves in the foot. But I do feel like with Neptune there, that also reinforces some of that potential for skullduggery that you were talking about, for people to be hiding, as Liz has said, some with the simple intention of protection of home and family and personal concerns, but others with the intention of hiding bad behavior. I do find it interesting. We've got that moon that is with Chiron there. It's not, it's not super close to the ascendant, but it is heading in that direction, shall we say. And I feel like with Moon and Chiron there in particular, there is this need for us to do some paying attention to our wounds in private, to do some of the deep psychological work necessary in order to rebuild our courage in the face of so many changes. You know, the 12th house, yes, it can be the house of sorrows and self-undoing, but it can also be the retreat, the meditation, the monastic impulse, the time spent recuperating from illness or harm. It has that association with hospitals, for example. But strictly from the standpoint of how do we, as the populace of the United States, since this is a chart for the capital of the United States, how do we in the United States make use of this energy for better rather than for worse? And I would say doing some deep self-reflection.
I was going to say that looks like a big thing for psychotherapy for the collective.
Bingo, right on the nose. And as Liz knows, I'm a big advocate of I think we need to really destigmatize therapy, and lots of people need it. Think about it. The world has been, humans have been kicking around on the planet for goodness knows how long, and have been experiencing lots of trauma. Lots and lots of intergenerational and ancestral trauma for so long. And we would do well to, rather than sit here and go, oh, I'm not affected by that, stiff upper lip. Well, you know what? We cannot just push our way through our pain endlessly. And it accumulates. Epigenetic trauma is a thing where you take on the pain that your ancestors went through. Sometimes through events like, let's say they went through a famine. Well, now your genes change in order to make sure that you won't starve. And it makes it hard for, descendants of people who suffered from a famine to lose weight. Something as simple as that.
Yeah.
So, rather than sitting here and denying that those things can harm us, or that they can have effects on us that we don't automatically see. Look at all this stuff in this hidden place, right? Instead of denying it, why don't we actually be willing to do that personal therapeutic work?
Yeah, well, I think this definitely shows how the U.S. is going to step back off the world stage and go more inward with all those, the sun and Neptune definitely in the 12th house. Lot of internal stuff happening. And so that also tells me there's going to be a lot of changes within the United States. It's, with all of that.
Yeah, definitely. Especially with, looks like we've got Uranus is in the first house. So, yeah. That's an identification with change.
Yeah.
Right. Things behind the scenes happening that we're not aware of perhaps at this time. So with all that 12th house. So you ready to go on to the west coast of the United States chart?
Yeah.
Okay, in this chart, we have another fixed sign, and this one's an error, Aquarius. And the midheaven is Sagittarius. And Neptune in this chart is in the first house, but getting ready to go into that second house. So who wants to start this time? Simon?
Well, note where the ruler of the midheaven is. In the fourth house.
Oh, okay.
And this is a reinforcement of that, paying attention to what is close to home. But since it's Jupiter, Jupiter can relate to leadership. Okay. So again, this is one of the things I find very interesting when we look at these charts one after the other for these different placements or different places, is that we see these kinds of layers to the themes. Neptune here it looks like Neptune is in the first house. So there would then be more of an identity with that change in vision here on the West Coast. And with a sense of what is new that needs to happen, what is different that needs to happen, how do we need to step up to a braver vision, a more courageous vision, a more adventurous vision. How do we need to use our imaginations to create a new cycle for ourselves? Okay. With that, Uranus, not Uranus, that Aquarius ascendant, traditional ruler would be Saturn, transcendental or modern ruler would be Uranus. And Saturn is right there, up there in that first house as well, along with Neptune, while Uranus is in the third house. So that Saturn in the first house, has a certain identification with seriousness. And with that Saturn being in Pisces, then there is that sense of the need for emotional maturity and self-identifying as somebody who has to be the grown-up in the room.
Yeah. I have to tell you, I agree with you about that Neptune in the first house, because I've noticed that usually when it's in the first house in a person's chart, they actually relate personally with what's going on in the collective. There's how you say simpatico with the individual and the collective, and how they relate to one another, right? And I think I agree with you with the Neptune in the first house. I think it's definitely there's definitely more of a outward role here of people in this region versus the other region of the East Coast. And I think also what jumps out to me in this chart is that Jupiter in the fourth house, and then again, which is a house of somewhat resources, a lot of land, also where you live, your lineage and everything. And then we see that sun and moon and Chiron and Hygeia there in the second house. I definitely think there could be some change in resources in the collective here a little bit in the U.S. And I think it's definitely the West Coast is going to be a little bit more focused on our resources with all that in the second house there. But I actually don't think this is necessary. I like this chart better than I do the country one. And I do feel like this one steps up more to the plate.
Mars in the sixth, is acting to defend what is ours on a daily basis. Okay. Makes a habit of protecting what matters to us. I do think it's interesting that, you've pointed out all this stuff in the second house and Jupiter in the fourth in relation to resources, because one of Trump's executive orders involves logging public lands. And here in the Pacific Northwest, there is an awful lot of forest and an awful lot of people who do not like the idea of having all of that be sold off to the higher. Yeah. We don't want to see it clear cut. We don't want it sold off to the highest bidder. What's also interesting is that companies who do logging, who actually care about sustaining their own profitability, don't actually want to clear cut everything. And something I found very interesting was that one of the first people responding to that executive order was somebody from a logging company who said, I don't know if this is a great idea. and I'm going to, like, he basically said something to the effect of, like, I'm going to need to look into that. He did not want to commit to, oh yeah, this is like, oh yeah, we're gung-ho for this. And it should be noted that in Alaska, that some of the public lands there that some folks have wanted to auction off or clear cut or whatnot, that there have actually been people not willing to put bids on to do that. Specifically because there is this recognition that some things you really don't want to despoil like that, or you fundamentally change the region in ways that are not helpful to other industries. Washington State has, where I live, where all three of us live, has a tourist industry that is built off of us being the evergreen state, off of us having lots of beautiful trees and mountains and pristine wilderness. What happens if that gets clear cut?
Right, exactly. So why don't we give, Liz, you've been really quiet. What do you think about this chart?
Well, I agree with you that I like this one better than the East Coast one for sure. So it's nice that we live on the West Coast, but we'll still be having reverberations from the East Coast chart regardless, because we're part of one country. So and you pretty much covered everything that I was thinking of between the two of you, so it's like, I thank you for covering that. So are you guys ready to go on to the aspects?
Yeah.
Okay, and we're using the Seattle chart for all the aspects, but regardless, the aspects will stay the same for all the charts that we've used, because I didn't include points to the ascendant or the midheaven. So Justin, you want to start?
I would just, for time's sake, I think I would point out just something that we haven't talked about that I thought was interesting was the Juno in Sagittarius in the 9th house there. And of course, that's trining that North node. And then, of course, that Mars in Cancer there, sextiling, or it looks like it's sextiling Vesta. But I think those are two kind of.
No, it's trine Vesta.
Is that trining?
Yeah, it's trine Vesta.
Okay, trining Vesta. Just a couple of outliers there to pay attention to. I think that's kind of important. I think there's and I think again, I think the Juno up there in the 9th house is good. It kind of sets us apart with certain ideas and government and so on and so forth. So,
well, that Juno trines that Neptune. So Neptune enters Aries and trines Juno. And Juno's retrograde in Sagittarius, so kind of reconsidering what are our commitments, what are our institutions, are we actually, willing to abide by certain agreements with those institutions in order to maintain them? What are our partnerships? What are our alliances? But I agree with you, like Juno being up at the midheaven like that and trine this Neptune, I think for this region in particular is really nice, and in terms of setting forth a vision for how do we ally with each other, how do we honor our commitments, how do we honor our oaths. Okay, what promises do we make and keep? And, with Juno being up in the 9th house, then that's going to be concerned with actually being intelligent about it.
Yeah.
right?
I
With
think,
making intelligent alliances.
and I think that Mars in Cancer in the sixth house deals with the working, the working middle class and so on and so forth. There, so good for unions and good for, um, people taking care of each other with jobs and so on and so forth. With Mars in Cancer in the sixth house there. So that was the only thing I was going to point out about this.
So I like that you pointed that out with regard to that working class element, or association for Mars in the sixth house there, because this Mars is, is loosely trine Vesta there in Scorpio, which is a Mars ruled sign. So that Vesta's answering to Mars. And this Mars is applying to the trine with Saturn. And that feels like, the having the focus and the willpower to stand up for working class rights on a daily basis, and to do so in a way that that shapes things for a long time to come, because it's Saturn. And that perhaps knocks down that which is not built to last, because Saturn also, crumbles that which isn't a good foundation, right?
Yep.
But that Vesta in Scorpio has a certain ruthlessness and a certain willpower, certain drive, and holds sacred our deep feelings, our deep emotions, and asks us to pay attention to what are the power dynamics that we are upholding.
Yeah.
And she's in the ninth house, which, among other things, relates to the courts.
Yep, I agree.
So we may see some good backup from some judges to actually help working class folk.
Exactly. And then Neptune has a sextile to Pluto, and that's been happening for some time. It's been within that orb. So do anybody want to speak to that, or just go to the next slide?
No, I think just for time's sake, to the next one.
So who wants to start with this one?
Well,
Simon.
That Mars in Cancer that we have been talking about is square the moon and Chiron in Aries. And, I do feel like that, among other things, that relates to how ordinary people have been feeling like there is increasing difficulty with being able to put food on the table, with being able to take care of their day-to-day needs, and ensure that the roof stays over their head, ensure that they protect their families. So I think that relates to that sense of frustration, and becomes a motivator. Squares are a motivating factor. Trines are lovely, but they can sometimes, we can sometimes sleep on them, but squares don't let us sleep on them. Okay.
Well, I wanted to say something about the Mars square Chiron. I think it's a positive aspect in a way that it actually can allow us to, through our work, and because Chiron in the second house can be an indicator of poorness with resources, whether it's Maslow hierarchy needs, food, money, housing, whatever. And I think it's positive that it squares Mars in Cancer in the sixth house. It just tells me that through service and through work that that a lot of people can get help with their resources with that. So there's a positive aspect of that I think is possible. And I also think that the triangulation there of what did I want to say? Well, it's Jupiter's trining Pallas there, Pallas Athena, And I think there's a good aspect there with communications and the collective on the this region of the west coast in this time zone. So I think that's a positive thing. But I wouldn't say really much more than what we've already said. I think I covered a lot.
So I agree with you that Mars squaring that moon Chiron can be positive in the sense that the square's motivation can be helpful from the standpoint of mutual aid.
Mm-hmm.
Mutual aid societies, I think, are a big factor in terms of helping people to join together to protect people's day-to-day needs, and protect our families, protect our homes, even when things seem chaotic and challenging perhaps on the national level. That Jupiter square series also speaks to how we may be looking at some challenges coming down from whatever the federal government is up to, that in turn make people concerned about, okay, how are we going to keep people fed? How are we going to make sure that our unhoused neighbors don't starve in the streets, for example? But again, it feels to me like there's a helpful quality to those squares. They motivate us and they get us paying attention to what we care about most. And, on that collective level, then that gets us to not just ignore what's happening to our neighbors, right? Remember, I talked at the beginning about, people are, hunkering down and maybe are having trouble acknowledging the connection with what's happening to somebody else. And yet when we see these squares, there is this, no, we're all struggling on some level. Can we band together in order to, make a better life for us all? So yeah. And especially with Jupiter trine Pallas, like you mentioned, that is some strategic thinking. And I do feel like it is, Jupiter's hopeful. Even in his detriment in Gemini, Jupiter's hopeful, and wants to bring us good things and wants to expand whatever he touches. And so in this case, he's expanding our ability to have some wisdom in our communications and to plan well together and to think tactically. That Pallas looks to be, that Pallas is pretty close to the ascendant, like really, really tight orb there. It's 2 minutes. So, the ascendant of this chart, the identity of this chart is tied to that Pallas. The ability to make wise choices, to plan ahead, to think strategically, and because of the tie to Jupiter, then the ability to sustain hope and communicate that hope. So I love that.
And then that Mars is in a grand trine, mini grand trine or talent trine to Saturn, and then they're sextile both back to Uranus. So, it's Mars and Saturn are completely different energies. I always think of them as the gas and the brake pedal, but Uranus, regardless, wants them to work together and change some things anyway. And it's in that Mars is in that sixth house of working together, is what I would say on a daily basis. Anything else anybody wants to add?
No, I think we kind of beat this to a dead horse. I know we are on a time thing, so that's why I was like, I've only wanted to touch the high points here. So yeah,
I would say that mini grand trine is lasting change. So
I like that.
What is the lasting change we are aiming for? And I mean, that's really the most important thing I think for us to pay attention to in all of this, is to, keep true to what is it that is the best of our hearts, what is it that is the best of our intentions, the best of our vision, Neptune, for the future, and then how are we going to act bit by bit together in order to affect that.
Thank you. Justin, do you want to add a last comment?
Well, I think, with the Neptune into Aries, the whole collective is making a change. There's going to be changes in alliances and power structures around the world. But I think that we need to keep our chin up and not get depressed or down on the thing. And I think it's really about taking advantage of the Neptune in Aries and striking out, starting some new things. That's innovation. And I think that we can have a lot of good things come out of this as well, out of this Neptune and Aries. So I'm trying to focus on the positive there.
Great. Well, I want to thank Justin and Simon for joining me today. It's been a great presentation, and I look forward to having you back on my channel. And we'll just finish up. Oh, I want to thank all the people that are watching live and those that come back and watch at a later time. And Simon, I'll let you tell them about your slide here.
So I can be found on Patreon, where I write about the ongoing astrological transits, and I create custom astrological art for my patrons. I do like to relate what's going on in the skies to art and visual themes to help people to better understand them. And like Liz and Justin, I am a consulting astrologer. So if you wish to schedule a consultation with me, please contact me at or visit iconalchemy.com. Thank you.
Thank you. And Justin?
Yeah, best way to find me is on YouTube and under Astrological Yogi, and you'll see all the shows that I'm a part of, okay?
Thank you. And to get a hold of Justin, his email is justin.elzie@gmail.com. And we all do consultations. We all have newsletters. We're on YouTube, so we appreciate you subscribing or contacting us for consultations. And the Astrology Star Sisters does a variety of shows. Justin and I do the astrology forecast and the full moon forecast each month. And we have a new show coming that's called Cosmic Connections, and it's about relationship astrology. So that'll be probably the middle of next month. And Justin and I will be on Talk Cosmos on March 30th, talking about the new moon solar eclipse in Aries. And to get a hold of Simon, it's iconalchemy.com. My website is alightpath.com. And Justin, you can reach at justin.elzie@gmail.com. And I want to thank you both for being here today, and all those that are joining us live and that come back and watch this later. So we're going to sign off and say goodbye for now. So bye.